Hey there, friends. Today's video does contain disturbing topics and disturbing subject matter, so viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And as always, thank you. I've been flirting, if you will, with online dating for probably the last 4 or 5 years now. And before you start to feel bad for me, it wasn't consistent. I would go on a few dates that seemed fine, and then something would end up happening or we just wouldn't click. So I would quit, get rid of the apps, and delete my profiles. I would then try again, and unfortunately the cycle would keep repeating. But I wasn't willing to give up yet. I still wanted to find someone that I could spend the rest of my life with, so I cleaned myself up, and again, updated my profiles ready to start searching. And this was early 2022. I guess I was feeling more confident about myself and the state of the world as I went on another hiatus from mid-2020 until close to the end of 2021 for obvious reasons. I had a few matches, some that ended pretty quickly at the chatting part, but others I was actually able to go out with. However, there was one girl that really drew me to her, and I thought I was the luckiest man around when she actually agreed to a date. This girl's name was Callie, telling me that it was short for Calliope. She had long, wavy hair that probably went about to her mid-back in a copper blonde color. She had soft green eyes that complemented the freckles on her face. But her smile and her laugh was really what did it for me. It was adorable. She had some kind of dumb joke on her profile too, which I had answered it correctly. It's already off to a good start when they don't take it too seriously. We talked for a bit, and then we even video chatted a few times before we actually went on a date. The first date went perfect. We had dinner, then we walked around a nice dog park and got ice cream nearby. It's normally here where I feel good about things, but will then get a message through the dating site saying that it won't work and I would start over. However, Callie surprised me. She said that she would love to do something again. So eventually we had our second date, and we went to a movie and arcade, which was a lot of fun. We started learning that we had a lot in common, especially in the type of music that we listened to. So when she asked me if I wanted to go to a concert with her for a band that we both enjoyed, I agreed. I even offered to pay for both tickets, or just mine, but she refused, saying that she had already bought them. Now, I had never really gotten this far in the process, so I don't know how long this normally took for others, but this all happened within the span of a month. So, I dressed a little down from what I normally wore, picking a band shirt and jeans, and when I picked her up, she was wearing something similar, although it looked much better on her. We decided to grab a few slices of pizza before the show, and went to a local pizzeria that was probably about 45 minutes away from the venue. Unfortunately, as we were enjoying our pizza and each other's company, she got an email or a text about an electrical fire occurring at the venue, and until they knew it was safe, all shows would be canceled, starting from that night forward, until further notice. We were both pretty disappointed, because I think we were both really looking forward to it. After moping for a bit, I suggested that we still drive around the area, as we may have been able to find the band members at a local bar or something. However, she had better ideas, and suggested that we just go back to my place. This was not something I would have ever offered, nor have expected. The reasons should be obvious, but being a guy, I never wanted to suggest anything, and I really didn't have much self-esteem. But she insisted, saying that we should make the most of the night. So, after we finished eating, we left, stopping only to get some cheap wine at her recommendation and headed back to my place. Once we got there, I played some music from the same band that we were supposed to see, and I even put on a previous live performance of theirs on YouTube, trying to be funny or sweet, I guess. After we talked for a while, things heated up, so we ended our night in the bedroom. That night was fantastic, and since we didn't work the next day, I was looking forward to spending the day with her. Yet, when I woke up that morning, the spot next to me was empty. I thought, no problem, maybe she just got up before me and was in the bathroom. Or even maybe she beat me to making breakfast. So, I got out of bed, walked past the bathroom to see the door open. I went to the kitchen, and I noticed it was empty too. I got a little discouraged at first, thinking maybe she had left, but her purse was still sitting on the coffee table. Then, I heard a loud crash and realized I didn't check the spare room, which I had made into my makeshift office. I quickly ran to the room, opening the door, and a flood of emotions ran through me as I saw Callie standing over what was my laptop, holding a hammer, and her face was a splotchy, crying mess. When I was finally able to talk, I blurted out, "What the hell happened?" I know, I'm dumb. It was obvious, but for some reason I still didn't want to believe it. In a shaky voice, she made comments about me seeing other people behind her back. I was confused by this because I hadn't been, so I tried to figure out what exactly she was talking about. She said she noticed my dating profile where we met and saw that I had gone on other dates other than her. However, I guess what she failed to see was that I hadn't gone on any other dates since I went on the first one with her. There were ones prior, yes, but I had 2 more lined up around the same time that we met, but I had canceled them because I was into her. For some reason, none of this worked for her, or maybe it was just too late. I don't know, but she kept screaming about how I was a liar and how I was just using her. I again tried to reason with her and calm her down, but nothing was working. She snapped, and she said that I was going to pay for hurting her, and she then charged at me with the hammer. I ran out of the room, holding the door shut behind me, hoping to just buy a little bit of time to think about what I needed to do. And that's when I could tell that she was swinging the hammer at the door. I let go of the door and made a mad dash to the front door, running out of my apartment in only my boxers. I ran down the stairs and started banging on the door to another apartment. There was an older lady that answered, and my God, I still feel awful to this day for doing this, but I ran in, begging her to call the cops and trying to explain what happened. I think that she was already about to call 911 on me alone. I stayed by her front door, stopping myself from looking around her place, hoping that my pathetic self looked harmless to her, until I heard the police knocking and calling out. I opened up the door, and I told them what happened, and I led them to my apartment. They made me stay outside so that they could get my side of things, while another cop went in to get her. After a short time, it was a small apartment after all, I heard shouting and what I assumed to be people struggling. They finally came out with her in handcuffs. She had on one of my t-shirts that she had slept in, but also the zip-up jacket that I had worn the night before. When she saw me, she instantly became enraged, and they had to calm her down again to get her into the car. They then had me walk through my place to see if anything was taken, or if anything else was damaged. She ended up finding my cell phone and breaking that, And she also smashed a picture that I had in my living room of myself, my mom, and my sister. My dad died when I was young, so they were the only two people that were really significant to me. Oh, and they also found her hanging off of my balcony, talking about how she was going to jump. I lived on the second floor, so she may have had some broken bones if she did, but that was about it. Not to mention, it was grass below my patio, not concrete. After all was said and done, I think I was just confused and disappointed more than anything. I didn't press charges, but she had actually bitten the officer that had detained her, so they had their own charges to file. I don't know what exactly changed or happened, nor will I probably ever know, but I felt bad for her more than anything. There was obviously something wrong, or maybe something traumatic had happened to her to cause her to be like that, but I think she probably could have used help more than charges. In the end, I just got a cheap phone until tax season and replaced them both at that point. I don't really know whatever happened to Callie, as she never tried to contact me after that, but I really do hope that she's doing better. But yeah, I'm also taking a break from dating. Again. The story is really reaching back to a time before all the dating sites were really a thing, and way before smartphones and apps were the center of our lives. Back then, before everything was so simplified, I used to be a longtime member of a certain IRC. For the kids out there, that's Internet Relay Chat Room. These were chat rooms that were more or less embedded on websites, and they were pretty much anonymous, in the fact that all you really had to have was a display name, and not much else. Hell, most of them had a feature that would let you join in as an unnamed guest, and the rooms would sometimes be filled with guests 04235 and such. They were a lot of fun, and I kind of miss those days, but nowadays the internet is all about look at me specifically. So the idea of anonymity being a core concept is relegated to pretty much just the dark web. Now, despite the fact that there was this layer of anonymity with IRC chat rooms, it was actually quite common to, quote-unquote, find love while chatting with these people. There was a direct messaging system too, so you could have conversations one-on-one, and you could get to know the person on the other end pretty well, even if there was no way to confirm literally anything they told you or said. I'm certain that some of the people I spoke with that were interested in me were probably 60-year-old guys pretending to be women in their 20s. And that's okay. I could safely say that this was a long time ago, or that was the old me. Now, there was one person that I spoke with in these chat rooms that I actually did have a bit of a relationship with, albeit only for a couple of months. Her username was the title to an Evanescence song, with some X's and numbers thrown in the mix, but I can safely say that her actual name was Taylor. Taylor was a year older than me at the time. I was 21 and she had just turned 22 when we met, and had started speaking. I don't remember why we started talking one-on-one, but we did. And after a while, things seemed to get to a point where we both wanted to start a relationship. Now, long-distance relationships back then were a bit different than what they are in 2023. Long-distance phone calls were expensive, and cell phones had set text and talk minutes, so it wasn't like you could be as close to the other person as you can in the current year. Because of this, we had our IRC conversations, and we also had emailed each other a few times. And before anybody mentions that Taylor was probably one of the 60-year-old men that liked to roleplay as a young woman, I actually knew that Taylor was legit. We had sent pictures to each other, including pics to prove that we were real. This was essentially a picture with the date, time, and our username written on our hands in Sharpie and covering one of our eyes. Yes, things were that complex back then. You had to be creative to come up with something that was difficult to fake, to prove that you were who you said you were. Now, all of this is to say that Taylor was gorgeous. She was exactly what you would think of when I say 22-year-old girl with an Evanescence username that likes to talk in IRC rooms. Dyed black hair, bright blue eyes, liked the color black on everything, had a few face piercings, and let me tell you, I instantly fell in love with her. I even told her that she was literally the girl I was looking for in life, and she thought that that was the funniest thing ever. From there, we did say that we were dating, actually. We would chat every night, send pictures of ourselves through email, and while things never went past PG-13, this was the happiest I had ever been in my life. We had our little relationship for almost 3 months on the dot, and everything seemed great. Until there was a stretch of time that she just didn't log in. I didn't see her in our chat rooms, and I would email her, but she wouldn't reply. I was genuinely upset, thinking maybe something happened to her, maybe she wasn't really as interested in me as she had claimed. I was almost heartbroken, thinking I had messed this up, and that this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing that I had just ruined. I kept emailing her every night, just hoping she would see them or maybe send a response like, "Oh, my internet was out for a few days, sorry about that." Or, "I was out of town." I was basically holding out hope that she would say anything to bring it back together. And then, I did get a response. But it was a rather strange one. It was just, "Hey, hop on IRC." It actually made me almost giddy to hear from her again, so I did what she requested and logged in. Immediately, she sent me a DM saying hello. I replied, asking how she was and if she was okay. She completely ignored those messages and just said, "What's your address? I want to send you something." I have to pause here to say that I was dumb, and I was in love with this girl, so I didn't hesitate at all in giving this random internet person my address. Nowadays, I would be lambasted for doing something so stupid, and rightfully so, but back then, there really wasn't this concept of internet strangers are not your friend. So I responded to her, told her my address, thinking that this was maybe the start of us moving into something a little more serious. And of course, the response that I got back was not what I expected, nor what I wanted. The message that I got back from Taylor was clear as day, and I actually remember it word for word. "This is Taylor's husband. Stop messaging my girl, or else you'll be next." And that was it. What I would be next for was anybody's guess, but this was pretty clearly a threat. I mentioned that she never told me she was married, and then mentioned that she and I were really good friends, and if he was really her husband, I would respect that. After a few moments of silence, they logged out of the account, leaving me confused, devastated, and just overall feeling kind of betrayed. That was the last time that I ever spoke with that account. They never logged back into the server, and Taylor never responded to any of my emails. So, that was effectively the end of my relationship, but not the end of the story. About 2 weeks later, I actually got a package at my house. The return address just said Taylor. There was no address or city or anything like that. It was just her name. I hesitated to opening it, thinking that it was going to be something messed up, and, well, it was. When I opened the box and moved all the packing materials, there at the bottom of the box was a kitchen knife, and on the blade of the kitchen knife was a hard, crusty brown-red substance that I assume was blood. I immediately called the police, asking them to send an officer to my house because I had gotten a package with a potential murder weapon. That was a really fun story to try to explain to the officer when he got there, not going to lie. I had to tell him that I had met a girl on the internet, and that we were dating, but then her real-life husband had threatened me after I gave him my address, and then today the package showed up. I feel like if I had to tell this story to an officer this year, it would be less strange, but back in 2003, it was like explaining foreign concepts, and they had a lot of questions. I ended up having to go to the station to pretty much be interrogated, and after answering questions for about 4 hours, they decided that I was probably telling the truth, and they took the knife, saying that they would look further into it. I don't know what they were looking into. All I had was her first name, online username, and a picture of her. I have no idea if their investigation ever went anywhere, nor do I know if that blood was human. But it was definitely sent to me as a threat, and it told me what he meant when he said I was next. All of this was 20 years ago, and looking back, I do kind of miss the old internet. Hopefully this can trigger some nostalgia for your older audience and maybe educate your younger audience on how things used to be. Remember, kids, don't tell strangers where you live, or you may end up with a bloody knife in your mailbox. Hi, Raven. This event actually happened to me fairly recently, and I wanted to share with you after listening to some similar experiences, so here it goes. I'm in my late 40s, and the closest to a serious long-term relationship I've had was with my kid's father. I got pregnant at 16, which forced us into a marriage per our parents' demands. We were still kids ourselves, and barely knew each other, so it was definitely difficult at first. But we slowly worked on ourselves to make sure that we were there for our little girl. Then we had another girl that wasn't necessarily planned, but was also very welcomed. However, I had her when I was 30, so my girls are about 15 years apart. Thankfully, they get along regardless of the age difference, and I'm incredibly blessed for them. Now, their father seemed to have two sides to him, so while he seemed ecstatic about our second daughter, I guess he was having a midlife crisis and had burned through a bunch of our savings on his friend's wife, whom he also sort of had an affair with. Anyways, long story short, we got a divorce. The girls both chose to stay with me, so good riddance. So, even though I've only been legally divorced for the last 2 years, I was already emotionally divorced, or alone, for years prior. I was feeling pretty lonely, especially with one daughter already being grown up and have moved out. So, my oldest, Lacey, actually suggested that I put myself out there and try my hand at love again. I'm not the best with technology, but I can get myself around a computer. She came over and got me set up on one site that she had also been using herself. I had a few younger guys message me, but it was way too weird to me that these guys were interested in me because they were too close to my daughter's age. But I did finally come across a guy named Bill. He was actually 2 years older than me. He had 3 kids close to the same age as my younger daughter, and said that his wife had died a few years prior, so he was looking to start over. We started talking through the site, and then even started talking over the phone. He seemed very family-oriented, which made me feel even better about him. I also shared with him about my little family and how I ended up here. I told him about my 2 girls, and he also seemed very interested. I've noticed while scrolling through people that there weren't a lot that were interested in a woman with kids at home, so I was relieved more than anything when he asked about my daughters. He asked how old they were, their names, he asked about things they were interested in, and he seemed like he genuinely cared, which was already winning me over. So, after about a month of talking, I finally got up the courage and agreed to meet him in person. We met at a local coffee shop, which we were both familiar with and frequented often. When we met, we hugged, and then I noticed he looked around me and asked where my daughter Molly was, my youngest. I told him that she was in school, as she was 15 at the time. It was a slightly odd question to me, as I knew he had kids around the same age, so I assumed they were in school as well. I did let it go, however, as we did talk about her a lot, so I assume he was just wanting to meet her too. We just talked for a while before we eventually decided to leave. He was very kind, very funny, and he had a very distinguished look. He reminded me of a slightly overweight Robert Downey Jr., so for my age, I thought if this worked out, then I'd gotten lucky. We had continued talking, and we met up for dinner a few nights after. This time, Molly was at a friend's house after a sporting event, so she didn't join us. Bill, again, made a comment about this, and I explained the whole thing to him, and he just seemed kind of disappointed. I know now that it was just me being clouded by the situation, but again, I thought it was kind of sweet that he was so interested in meeting my kids. So, I told him that we could look into scheduling something so we could both bring our kids, and he seemed to like the idea. It was probably about 2 weeks later, and the church that I volunteer at was doing a potluck dinner. Molly and I were already planning on going, and everyone was invited, so I thought I would ask Bill to join us, since there would be plenty of kids for them to play with too. He happily agreed. We planned to meet there that night. However, when we all arrived, I saw him get out of his Jeep with what I assumed to be his youngest, who was only around 8 or 9. I asked him about the others, and he said that they were all busy doing something else, so he just had the youngest. I knelt down to say hello, knowing their name already, but they were really shy. But that was understandable. Bill quickly cut our conversation off, though, to ask where Molly was, and I told him that she was already inside helping out. So, I escorted him into the church and went to get Molly to introduce her. Molly knew that I had been talking to Bill, so she also knew what he looked like, and a little about him from what I had told her. She's also a very kind and outgoing girl, so when she approached us, she smiled and said hello. Bill immediately pulled her in for a hug. She hugged back and even laughed about it. Again, I thought it was a sweet moment, and I was really happy that they both seemed okay with each other. But then, as the night progressed, I started noticing things that were making me uneasy. As we sat and talked while eating, he was talking to Molly even more than he was talking to me. He was asking her similar questions that he asked me on our coffee date. He asked her what she was interested in, what she liked to do, her goals and aspirations, all of it. Again, it just seemed like he cared about her feelings, but then it got weirder. He started asking her, with me present, if she had a boyfriend. Molly and I were really close, so I knew that she was kind of seeing a boy at the time. They'd basically gone to their school dance together. She answered him, saying yes, and he said, well, a boy's lucky to have a beautiful girl like you. She smiled and thanked him. He continued to ask her more, but when I tried to ask about his son, he would barely answer me. And Bill would answer for him or stop me from being able to talk to him, which I found really odd. Feeling a bit weird, I decided to grab all of our plates and take them into the kitchenette. I wasn't gone long, but when I came back, Molly jumped up and said that she was going off to help in the back, and then rushed off. I thought it was odd, but decided to leave it alone for the moment. I went to sit down again, but Bill then stood up saying that he had to leave, and after a quick, half-hearted hug, he was gone. And with that, the whole night ended with this really weird aura. On our way home from church, I noticed that Molly was extremely quiet, which was unlike her. I asked her if something was wrong, and after a deep breath, she said no. I know her too well, and I know that there was something wrong, so I pushed, refusing to take that as an answer. Thankfully, it didn't take long to get it out of her. She said that she didn't like Bill, and that she didn't want me to see him anymore. She then explained the situation at the church, and it made me sick to my stomach. Bill had asked her if she was a virgin, and if she had ever experimented with a boy or with herself. She told me that she didn't know how to respond, so she just sat there, and he told her that if she was ever curious, she could come talk to him about it. There were other little things he said, but as soon as she saw me coming, she jumped out of the conversation. I was horrified and disgusted. I had no reason not to believe her. Both of my girls were happy that I was willing to find someone, so she wasn't the type to try and sabotage this, especially with this insane of a story. I apologized immensely to her and told her that it would never happen again. I messaged Bill that night and tore him a new one, and I told him that I was reporting him as well. He never messaged me back. I reported it to the authorities, but to my surprise, they couldn't even track the guy down. I had printed out his profile, so at least I had a photo of him, but his profile had since been deleted. His phone number had also been disconnected. And after looking into this guy further, it all seemed made up. I don't know who I actually met, or even if that kid was his. I was horrified that I brought this stranger around my daughter, and I kept my promise and told myself and my girls that if I ever meet someone else, I will make sure to do a thorough check on him before they meet. But, to be honest, I think I'm pretty happy with just my girls for the time being. About 10 or so years ago, I had a stint in my life where I was really lonely. Though I think maybe desperate is the better word. I guess I should say that I've had a few serious relationships throughout my life, but I hit 30 and a major level of depression because the man that I thought was going to be my husband decided that he wasn't ready for commitment, and we had to go our separate ways. This was after a 4-year relationship, mind you, and while he said it was a commitment issue, I'm pretty sure he was just wanting to see someone else. It is what it is, and sure, I'm bitter about it, but I have to accept it and move on. He's not who this story is about, though, so sorry for the tangent. Anyways, I was just out of that relationship, and then I turned 30 about 2 months later. And, as mentioned, I had a pretty deep low in my life. I was in that I need companionship now mentality, and I immediately leaned into making a profile for one of the online dating sites back then. I don't remember which one. It was whichever one was most popular back in 2011. Probably Plenty of Fish. I remember it being a bit confusing, and it kept trying to match me with people that were nothing like me. Nothing like reading a bio that it suggested to you and have it be the polar opposite of yourself. I know that opposites attract, but when it says no tall women and no women that like Harry Potter, and my bio literally mentions that I'm taller than average and a huge Potter fan, it almost feels like a joke. So, after scrolling through all the BS, matching with a couple of guys, messaging a few people, and really feeling like this was all a very hopeless venture, I finally found a guy named Dan. Dan was exactly what I was looking for in a man, physically, and all of his interests seemed to line up with mine. He had long black hair, looked to be taller than me, which was nice, although never a deal breaker, and all of his pictures had him wearing some pop culture referencing t-shirt that told me he was absolutely into the things that I was into. I marked that I was interested, just hoping that he would mark the same on me. And much to my pleasure, he did. I instantly sent him a DM and started off with something corny like, "Your hair is gorgeous. I wish I could get mine to be as shiny and straight as yours." I know, that sounds dumb, but I actually was kind of jealous. He responded almost immediately with some joke response about how he had made a deal with the devil to have hair like that. His off-kilter humor was actually one of the things that made me really like him, and I was excited to get to know him. I may have been desperate, but something in my heart was telling me that Dan could be the one. Like, he could be exactly what I was looking for, and maybe we could have a future together. Having these thoughts after just a few conversations may not be healthy, but there was really just something about him. We ended up talking on the phone a few times, and I started liking him even more. He had a beautiful singing voice. He told me that he used to be in a band that was kind of popular locally, but that they never went anywhere on the big stage. He told me that his last job was actually at an animal clinic, where he was tasked with keeping the animals company if they had to stay overnight or needed to be taken care of outside of the normal medical work. The more that he told me, the more I absolutely adored this man. And after a while, I started having this weird nagging feeling in my mind. Why was he single? He was attractive, talented, entertaining, and he loved animals. He was, overall, a really great and interesting guy. So why had nobody scooped him up and put a ring on his finger? I actually brought this up to him, and he mentioned to me that things were complicated. I asked, how complicated? Mostly because that wasn't really an answer that I was looking forward to. He responded by saying that he'd had a wife, and that things had recently gone sour, so he no longer had a wife. That kind of made sense to me. He was married and things went bad, so he was out looking for someone else to fill that gap in his life. I could relate. We ended up talking about our past relationships, or more so, I ended up talking about mine. He seemed a bit evasive, but I just assumed that he wasn't really feeling up to discussing it because it was so recent. I was okay with that. It was nice to vent out some of my frustrations, and he was really good at listening and helping me see things more clearly. Then, the big day arrived. We had agreed to meet up for coffee on a Saturday morning at a local coffee shop. I got there, and he was already seated in the back waiting for me. It was actually really nice to see him in person. He looked just like his photos. He had the same personality. He was the same funny and entertaining guy that I had come to know over these past couple of weeks. This was actually a huge relief, because I was worried that I was going to get catfished. We enjoyed our coffee and companionship for a few hours, and then I had mentioned that it was getting to be midday, and that I should probably be getting home at some point. But I would absolutely love to meet up again, and maybe have dinner or something. This is when he mentioned to me that he'd had a great time as well. Then he kind of shyly looked down at the floor, like something was wrong. I asked if he was okay, and he looked up and mentioned that he needed to ask me a favor. I said of course, not really thinking about what the favor could be, but he then mentioned that he actually needed me to give him a ride somewhere if I could. I realized that he was already there when I got in, so I hadn't seen him pull up, and he actually seemed rather embarrassed at this request, which was almost cute. At this point, I felt comfortable enough with him that having him in my car, driving him a few blocks or miles to his apartment, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Plus, I was honestly thinking this could be a long-term thing if it kept up like it had, so I was more than willing to do so. I told him that was fine and just kind of mentioned that I didn't know that he didn't have a car, and told him that he didn't need to be embarrassed about it. He thanked me, and we headed out to my car and we went to get him home. As we were driving, and he was pointing out where to turn, he started telling me more about his past, and how things had been really rough recently. I asked if the divorce had been a bad one, and he then dropped a bombshell. He mentioned that he and his wife actually hadn't gotten divorced. This killed me inside, and it kind of made things make more sense. He wasn't actually divorced. He was still married. Sure, they could have been separated, but if he wasn't divorced, then it was likely that they could get back together, or try to fix things, and then there would be no room for myself in Dan's life. I kind of shut down a bit after this, and I just listened to him tell me about how bad things were between him and his wife, not really paying attention to where he was telling me to go. Then, he had me turn one more time, a turn into the parking lot of a police station. I parked and just kind of looked around confused. I asked why we were at the police station, and it was then that he went really quiet and just sort of looked at the building and away from me. This whole situation was really weird, and I was honestly starting to feel a bit freaked out. This is when Dan looked over at me and said that he really enjoyed the short time that we had together, and said that I was a lovely lady, and that he was certain I would find somebody. He then said that he was about to go into the station and confess to doing something that was really, really bad, and that he was going to prison, most likely, for the rest of his life. He said that if things had gone differently, he would have loved to have spent more time with me. I asked what he had done and what he was talking about, and he just sighed and said that it was an accident, that he never actually meant to hurt anyone, and then he pushed my door open and walked into the building. I just sat there watching him walk into the department with his head held high and stop at the front desk. I watched the whole thing play out from right there in the lot, watched him talk to the desk clerk, watched an officer walk up to him cautiously, and then watched as the officer put him in cuffs and pulled him away from the desk. A few minutes later, another officer actually walked out to my car and spoke with me. He asked me if I knew the man that I had just dropped off, how I knew him, if I knew what had happened. I told him that we had just met a couple of weeks ago and that we had actually gone on our first date that morning. I was more or less interrogated by this officer in the parking lot about Dan, and I told him all that I knew. He told me that Dan had just walked in and told them that he needed to confess to murdering his wife. I obviously didn't know anything about that. I thought he was divorced. After a bit more talking, they gave me a card, took my info, and then let me leave. At this point, it was a little more clear to me how Dan had a wife, past tense, but wasn't divorced. And then, it occurred to me that I had had coffee with a murderer, and I even drove him to the station to turn himself in. I really don't know if our date was just him trying to get free coffee and then a ride to the station, or if he was really interested in me. But either way, it was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Not because he was a creep to me, but because he was perfectly normal the whole time we spoke during our date. This man was a murderer, but he seemed like a calm and complacent guy that was all there. That was just a normal person. And this was the only time I ever went on a date with someone that I met online, and I actually shut down my account after that. So, that, my friends, was a collection of 4 genuinely scary online dating stories. Some of them about the dating apps, and one of them about an IRC chat room. I never thought I would ever get a story about someone, something, a thing involving IRC, because IRC is... I know it still exists as a thing, but it's just such an old concept to me. I used to play an old... I don't remember what it was called, but I used to play an old Pokemon game online. It was like Pokemon Volcano or something. It was... I don't know. It was like an MMO, but it was kind of weird. It was like static images. But anyways, my point is, it actually had an IRC chat room connected to it, and I was definitely in that chat room a lot. I knew a lot of people in there, and it may sound strange to some people, but on my personal Facebook, I actually have 2 of them in my friends list now. So, that was like 10. It was like 20 years ago. It's crazy. My point is, I actually know what IRC is, so it's just crazy stuff. Terrifying stories. So, thank you to everyone who let me use their stories, or those who sent them in. Y'all are amazing. These are great stories. Genuinely creepy, genuinely scary, so... And of course, you know, they happened to people, so sorry this all happened to you. I don't know, I said that really weird. I wasn't trying to hype up these stories as being like, these are cool stories, whenever they're scary and are things that happens to people. I'm bad at this. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and want more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. February is going to be full of this kind of content, this lovey-dovey content, at least on Saturdays. Mostly because February is the lover's month, correct? With Valentine's Day coming up. So, alright. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought. Did you ever use IRC chat rooms? Were you ever in IRC? Or are you too young to know what IRC is? Or maybe you just weren't into that kind of thing. I don't know. Anyways, that wraps it up here. Friends, I hope you're having a lovely weekend so far, and I hope the rest of your weekend goes beautifully. And until I see you on the next video, remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise or forget it. And until I see you again, much love and sleep well.